They're an important part of keeping countries from going into wars. With the United Nations, two countries can settle their differences by either debating or gaining a treaty through the United Nations.
The United Nations want to help keep these countries out of wars. It's a helpful resource to have, not only physically but also mentally. And it's always good to know that there is always someone to help.
Okay.
Although the United Nations' goal is to keep peace, like you said, they don't always come up with a solution. So yes, the United Nations can help settle their differences, but the United Nations has to keep mutual ground. They can't choose sides. And the truth is, in order to come up with a treaty, both countries have to agree upon certain terms. Most countries don't want to compromise.
So in some cases, coming up with a treaty can take up to several years, and within those several years, tension starts to build up and increase between those two countries. By the time they both reach a mutual agreement, wars could have already broken out, causing destruction of government and starting rebel movements. So yes, the United Nations could help, or maybe make situations even worse.
Even if it does take the United Nations a great deal of time to reach agreements, they still have a great effect on the world. As an example, the United Nations help give aid to the people of Haiti after having them been struck by an earthquake. They provided shelters, food, and medical aid. A total of 152 aid members died. Not only does the United Nations help aid those in need, but also helps to stop genocides such as Darfur genocide, and the nations have their own military forces.
I agree with what she said.
Although your point is valid about the United Nations helping give aid to countries in need, such as Haiti, the United Nations cannot take military action unless shot upon, but they can help stop genocides if voted upon by the Security Council. And in the Darfur genocide, that is a prime example on how the United Nations were powerless when it came to give aid in war.
Because the United Nations has to agree on everything, if one member on the Security Council vetoes it, it's over. Well, in the case of the Darfur genocide, China happened to be against helping to stop the genocide. The reason behind this was because they were getting their oil supply from there, and they didn't want their oil supply to be cut off, so they vetoed against the UN, and they couldn't help fight in the Darfur genocide. May I also add that 300,000 people died in that genocide.
NATO has a lot of positives. It has a wide knowledge of all available military assets and resources. It also has inventory management by sharing the resources of spare parts and maintenance activities. The use of computer technology from NATO also allows the recording, processing, and transmitting of identification and management data.
Which means that that's good.
That's a positive.
That's a positive.
NATO has a lot of positives. It forms an alliance that can provide legitimacy for military actions. It allows for more partners involved in their own defense. And NATO has been the best investment
NATO
allies have made for over 60 years. It has successfully delivered security and stability.
NATO.
It costs the United States a lot of money to subsidize weaker members. It also has the potential to involve us in conflicts that aren't our interest.
NAFTA allows 450 million people in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to export to each other at a lower cost. It eliminates the tariffs between the three countries, U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
It also created nearly 20 million jobs.
True that. It reduces inflation by decreasing the cost of imports. NAFTA started on like January 1st, 1994, which is when I was born. Brought the immediate elimination of tariffs on more than 1/2 of Mexico's exports to the U.S. and more than 1/3 of the U.S. exports to Mexico.
Within the 10 years of NAFTA, of the agreement, all U.S.-Mexico tariffs would be eliminated except for some U.S. agricultural exports to Mexico that would be phased out within the next 15 years.
Most U.S./Canada trade was already duty-free, meaning that it didn't have...
Duties.
No, that's not what I meant. It didn't have, like, cost like as much. It didn't cost nearly as much as it was supposed to. NAFTA also seeks to eliminate non-tariff trade barriers and to protect the intellectual property rights of the products that they get imported to them.
NAFTA isn't good for the U.S. It ships our jobs out to other countries, and it supports poverty levels. See, per se, another company goes to another country, and they pay that country lower wages than we do. Well, people in those countries are just happy to have a wage at all. So people in that country think it's acceptable to get paid really low wages. So they won't really get out of the poverty level if they keep getting paid these low wages.